That's Mike. Thank you for joining. My name is Amelie, and you are watching the Celestic Intelligence Podcast. Today is episode number 39. Make sure I don't do some craziness here. Chat. You can actually answer to the chat because I have my other video or my other device on. But thank you for joining. Today we're going to be talking about the dark side of empathy. And a lot of people equate empathy with emotional intelligence. And yes, it is a very essential part of emotional intelligence, but it is also a it's kind of misunderstood. I think it's a little bit like the way people use it is maybe not the best way to describe it. A lot of people equate the idea of empathy with just being the opposite of narcissism, and it's not necessarily the opposite of narcissism. And so I would like to debunk that. I think that I can see why people would assume that, but there's a lot that goes into it. So in the story of Narcissus catches a glimpse of himself in some water. So he's looking at his reflection, and he's so completely self-absorbed in his own image, in himself, that he doesn't even hear anything outside of him. So he is the main character. And there's a lot that we can learn from that, right? Like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Having some main character energy, having some self-love, of being a little self-absorbed. Hi, Mike. There you are. I was like, I think he might be in the chat. I don't know. I had to get some coffee before. I have 2 cups of coffee every day. And so Narcissus, falls in love with himself. There's a lot that we can learn from the narcissistic people that are around us, that are in our lives. And even more so, we still need these elements of the self-love part of it, the self-absorption, the confidence that comes from the, traits that are, kind of embodied in the narcissistic spectrum. However, on the opposite, like in that story, in that archetypal story, you're also learning about Echo. So Echo is in love with Narcissus, but is so in love with Narcissus that she doesn't have a voice. She is doomed to echo the last thing anybody says. That's why the name Echo, hence the name. And so she is in love, but they can never connect because he is connected with himself. She's connected with him and just completely abandons herself. And so you have this really tragic love story, if you want to call it that. It's kind of a dark love story. Say Box Pub. Welcome in. Hello, everybody. So you have this, so I like to, instead of saying narcissist and empathy, like those being opposites, I don't see that as opposite. I think there's a light empathy and there's a dark empathy. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. And this is going to be empathy week. And the more appropriate way to say it is echoist. And I can't remember who coined that. I didn't coin it at all. Obviously, it's in the narcissist echo story. So, just kind of completing and going through with the rest of that story, that's important. So let's just talk a little bit about empathy, the empath, and why being in that echoist state is this, that's when it turns painful. a little painful. So we've been told that empathy is the ultimate leadership skill. We've been told that, empathy is emotional intelligence. We've been told, I don't know what if you guys have anything that you want to say about what you've been told empathy or what you think empathy is, but we all have a desire to have this empathy state. It is a core competency in emotional intelligence. It is how we connect and attune into one another. And if you guys are following any of the methods that I'm using to talk about nervous system first leadership, attunement is very, very important. And it is through the way of empathy and social awareness that we can tune into one another. We're basically, our nervous systems, I call it the Wi-Fi of being. Our nervous systems are the device that connects us from us to another. That's how we tune in. That's how we get the synchronicities. It happened today to me. I was thinking about somebody, and immediately, like within the minute, like probably within 10 seconds, they sent me a text message. That is how powerful the Wi-Fi of our being is. That's how powerful this antenna, this tuning that we have with our nervous system is. So attuning to others is this beautiful, scientifically backed ability that we have with our, human bodies, that we're able to connect with them. I am single. Elvis Pie, how are you? Natalie, all grown up from the Facts of Life lady. Facts of life, yeah. So, when we think about leadership and how important it is to attune to one another, that is important. And all of the method that I've worked out is based on the fact that we attune to one another. But what happens when the empathy backfires? What happens when the empathy that we have turns dark and we abandon ourselves for others? We abandon ourselves because we think it's the safe route. Abandoning yourself is I did a really great stream on this maybe a month ago. It's just called self-abandonment, and why self-abandonment is lack of self-love. And the lack of self-love is just like the Echo character in the narcissist story, where she has abandoned herself so much that she's doomed to a life of loneliness. Even though there's a connection there, she's lonely. She's abandoned herself, so she's not present with herself. So we can call this echoist empathy. I haven't really talked about like what we want to call it, but it really is being echoist. So that is the opposite of narcissism, is echoist. Now, I posited the idea of, who would you rather hang out with, a narcissist or an echoist? And if you're on this extreme side of both of these, it's a kind of a sliding scale. I look at it as a horseshoe, where it's kind of curved, and then the extremes are at the end of the horseshoe. And we really want to be kind of in this harmonious, centered area where, both of these extreme traits are mellowed by being in harmony with one another. So you don't want somebody that's going to be completely into themselves, that don't care about the other people around them. We're very community-based humans. We need to have that. In fact, I was reading a book. I don't have it with me, but I was reading a book called Happiness at Work, and I'll, if you guys are interested, I'll post a link or post the name of the book, and maybe I can look it up later. But there were some interesting statistics in that book that loneliness is actually if you're experiencing loneliness, it's equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's worse than obesity. it's health-wise, medically, just on your body. Like, loneliness is really, really harmful. So us being connected and not in isolation is actually important. Even though, a lot of us like to be alone. I love being alone. I do a lot of my research on my own without distraction, and so that's really helpful in that. However, I like to be connected with people. I like to know what the energy, what the vibe is, how are people interacting with stuff. It just, it ignites my neural centers into being really activated. And so it's really exciting for me to be around people, because then I get kind of the pulse of what's going on, which is why I love to travel. Traveling, not just around people, but in different environments, is very thought-provoking, and it teaches you a lot about just different lifestyles, different cultures. So we're going to be talking about the echoist, the dark empathy, and when caring erases you so much instead of empowering you. And I think that echoist this echoist description, even though it's, narcissist is a DSM, but echoist is not. There's no dark empathy DSM thing to say this is what you are. I think they have it maybe in other categories, but there really isn't any. There's narcissist, and then there's not really anything opposite that. So ultimately, what I'm going to be talking about today is we're not abandoning empathy. Empathy is still vitally important to the social and emotional intelligence that you hold as a frequency within your body, okay? This is not abandoning it. This is about upgrading it to where you can show up as your true self, knowing that you love yourself, knowing that you have confidence in yourself, knowing that you're worth every breath that you take. That's what this is. This is an upgrade into valuing your existence, finding purpose and meaning and connection in this, roadmap of life, whatever it is. Like, we're making it. We are the authors of our lives here. So, a couple weeks ago, I did this carousel post about visionaries, and I think I even did a stream about visionaries and why visionaries are unique, why that visionary perspective is important when it comes to leadership, because we want to have somebody that is painting us this beautiful future, and then we're like, do I buy that or no? Is that the future that I want or not, right? So my future is well-being workplaces where you're valued for your contributions, where you're valued so much that you can still take care of your family, that you're not being labor energy mined for just how much you can output. Can I strip mine this person of all of their, creativity and innovation and their novelty? Can I mine that so that I can benefit in the short term versus, if you're a visionary and you're planting that and you're getting people on board. I talked about it last week. We were talking about catalyzing change. The week before, we were learning about inspirational leadership and how that inspirational leadership is important. And attunement is vitally important when we look at this. So empathy is a gold standard for not just leadership, but, in education and therapy. We want to have empathy, especially in therapy. Could you imagine having a therapist that can't attune to you, and so You know, you're talking to them and they're not reflecting back to you. That would be kind of a shitty therapist, I would say. I wouldn't want that. I want somebody that hears what I'm saying and that can respond in ways that are going to benefit me and my, you know, my internal growth that I'm there to be in. So this really is about growth. Can you empathize with somebody, know, you know, what their goals and their dreams and desires are, and help them grow in that? Now, a good leader is going to attune into their team, to whomever their, you know, reports are. They're going to be able to tune in and say, you know, where do you see yourself in a year? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? You know, what can I do to help grow you as an employee to be the best version of you today, and also to be, to have an intrinsic goal? Because a lot of people, I mean, I've said this before, I've I straight up said in an exit interview, I was like, you could pay me twice as much, you can pay me twice my salary, and I would still leave. That is how much I'm, like, how much I would lay on the table. The money would not be worth it. And I've had lots of friends who have held, you know, executive positions who are like, I know that I make this much money, and it's great having that much money, but what I have to pay in order to receive that salary is not worth it. It's not worth my salt to give up that part of my life. You know, the things that I love doing, I'm not able to do it. In doing this job, I don't take care of myself. In doing this job, I'm like emotionally holding all of these employees, and I feel like there's nothing much I can do around that. So just know, people will leave their jobs, not because of money, but because of the work environment, because they're not, especially in millennials, I think they're 70% more likely to leave within 3 years if there is no leadership depth, if there's no growth for them. They don't have that intrinsic value that they're working towards, and so they'll just leave it. It's, you know, pretty interesting. Um, so empathy, you know, as far as history is concerned, it kind of was this cultural fix of how are we going to fix the disconnection, right? But it's not empathy alone that does that, because you can have empathy for people, but if you don't have confidence, if you don't love yourself, if you don't think that you're worth it, you're going to collapse. This is where collapse comes from, is holding into that dark empathy, that echoist energy, versus the narcissist energy. The echoist energy, you're more likely to collapse because of that. And I can say that for a fact. You know, I've experienced that myself. Just being real. Being real with you guys. I've gotten so used to collapse now because that's, you know, it's the echoist energy. It's not speaking up for yourself. So silence I see is really just this inner violence of, like, you know, I'm not worth it, so I'm not going to speak up. And it does a great disservice to yourself when that happens. So it is a cultural fix for disconnection, but we also need to be thinking about, how are we connecting? Like, is the connection this dark empathy, just pleasing others in order to make them like you, pleasing others by saying the right things, you know, all that stuff. And Brene, so in the visionaries, one of the visionaries was Brene Brown. So in the late 1990s, Brene Brown did a TED Talk and said, vulnerability is not a weakness in leadership. And by saying that, it was kind of this really charged discussion. I mean, that TED Talk went viral. It went viral because people are hungry for connection. They're hungry for connection. We all desire connection. It doesn't matter if it's in the workplace, in friendships. Start looking around. People are desiring, they're looking for connection. They want to be heard. And I think that, that disconnection is a huge part of why people, why there's rises in mental health crisis. And I mean, you can see it all over social media. And a big part of the disconnection is because of all the technology we've introduced into our lives very quickly, very rapidly. So within a couple generations, well, let's see, I guess it would have been introduced, the internet, to millennials in the millennial generation, and then Z, so Y, Z, A. So we've got like 3 generations of people, of humans, that have this really novel technology that we really haven't grasped on how, like, we've accepted that it's being integrated, but we haven't accepted the emotional and spiritual implications of what that introduction has done. So, and technology tends to expand rapidly. What I've seen in my research and investigation is that, technology, I would classify it as a very masculine energy. And so connection and community, I would classify that as feminine energy. And so when we talk about empathy and how important it is, it's going to become even more and more important to have this really strong feminine energy of connection, relationship, of empathy, of emotional intelligence. Like, yes, these are very core important concepts to integrate into our future. In fact, it's part of the well-being workplace concept is to have that. However, how do we implement that? How is it going to get implemented and stick? Because there's lots of people that are teaching emotional intelligence right now, and it really is going to be the future. However, if you can't hold it, if you're an echoist and you're just, you're unable to hold that energy into the future, you're going to collapse. That's why it's vitally important to get your nervous system regulated, because that's where it begins, is somatically understanding your body, the emotions, why they're there, the thoughts, and the separation between that, and spiritually how you're connecting with one another. Because I like to think of us as like mushroom networks, but these things are going to be important. So leaders need to be attuned to their workers. It's not an exception anymore. Like, we have to have it. In our personal relationships, we have to have that connection. These out of balance, polarized relationships, now they're fun and interesting and fiery and whatever, but the connection part of like actually being connected with your partner is going to be important. And then for, parents and their children, having empathy, not just being attuned to them, but like being able to listen to them and hold them with empathy, and also teach them strategies of how to get through things emotionally, especially when they're teenagers. And empathy can help build trust. It's not the only thing, but it can help build trust in relationships. And trust is an important glue. Trust and love are like these 2 glues. You know how I don't know if you guys have ever used resin, but with resin, sometimes you have to take one type of liquid and then another type of liquid, and you mix them together, and then that's what that chemical reaction makes it into this hardened compound. So with trust and love, like those two things, when you mix them together, it hardens into this really solid connection with one another. So really what we're talking about is having empathy without boundaries. This is where the collapse happens. Okay? It doesn't build connection. Nobody wants to be around an echoist. It's like being around somebody that's just copying you, that you can walk all over, that doesn't, like, if we're talking about entrainment, which is where our nervous systems are connecting with one another, if we're talking about entrainment and the interpersonal neural sharing systems, if we're talking about mirror neurons, do you really want to be around somebody that is like an echoist, like that is so involved with you but not with themselves, that doesn't love themselves, that talks down about themselves, um, that, you know, you can tell that they don't care. But if you hang around somebody like that, that energy is going to be intertwined into your energy. It's it's just the entanglement process of being around others. You attune to other people's energies, especially if you're opening up that empathy. So we want to build connection. We want to be around people that are in this harmonious zone of, you know, loving themselves enough, and then also having really strong boundaries of I'm not going to be mistreated, or anything like that. So echoism is a psychological term, and it is relatively a new one. I think it was in the 2010s when it was named, because I did some digging. I was like, there's something not right about calling empathy the opposite of narcissism. There's something not right there. Okay? It doesn't give the term empathy a good, it doesn't give it its service. But as far as a definition, it's people who overgive, who minimize their own needs and become invisible. um, it moves from just feeling. So instead of attuning and feeling, okay, this person, um, like it happens if my son is feeling a certain way. I'm very attuned to his energy. If he's feeling a certain type of way, if he's feeling angry, like I feel his anger. If he's feeling uncomfortable, it's almost I can feel his discomfort. You know, I've got this really deep connection with my son, obviously, from birthing him and then taking care of him for a long period of time. So I have this really strong attunement into how he's feeling and his needs are. And some parents can become completely absorbed in their children. I mean, I never watched Toddlers and Tiaras, but I'm imagining like those parents were so, they were so absorbed in their children. It was almost like they were putting their personalities into their children, because they missed out on something when they were younger, or whatever their reasoning was. But here are some symptoms of what it might look like if you have if echoism is you're experiencing that. So you're always mirroring others' emotions. So if somebody is feeling sad, you feel sad, right? If somebody's feeling happy, you feel happy. Now, the mirroring happens naturally because of our mirror neurons, but if you're not experiencing your own emotions, that's when what we're talking about here. It's not like, oh, we had this one event, say a family member died, and now we're all sad. Chances are you're going to feel your own emotions with that. But if you don't, and you're just mirroring those around you, that can be a symptom of echoist empathy. One of the symptoms is difficulty expressing your own needs. So if you're not able to say, I need space to work on this, um, I need you to make meals for me while I work through this really difficult time. If you're having trouble expressing what your needs are to others, um, chances are you have a little bit of echoist symptoms. If you feel drained after every interaction that you have with people, if you don't come away feeling excited or feeling filled up from being around others, you feel drained, you might have a symptom of echoist empathy. This is not like, oh yeah, if you have this, it's definitely that. It's just a symptom of that. So it's just something that you can do to kind of check through your own internal checkpoints. And if being praised as so understanding, but secretly feeling invisible, is something that you relate with, then you might have a little bit of this dark empathy, this echoist energy. So let's look at some real world examples of that. So the manager who mirrors every team opinion, but never leads decisively. Okay? I talk about it in my book. And this is I'm not faulting anybody when I bring up these scenarios of my workplace. It's just these are extreme things that ping every time that I'm looking at all of the connection of this. But you know, I had a manager that would never say no to anything. Okay, no boundaries whatsoever. Almost like if I say no, then it proves that I'm a shitty manager energy. And there was not really any discussion of, what is your workload? Can we take this on? There was none of that. There was no collaboration from the manager. It was just like, we're taking this on, you're doing it. We're taking this on, here's your role in the project. There was no discussion. There was no attunement with how much are you working? Is it possible for us to get this done? Or do we need to maybe add another body into the department? Okay. So they weren't necessarily checking in with their team per se, like their reports. They were checking in with the other leadership team of, we think this department should take this on. And instead of saying, no, we don't have the labor to manage that, it was always a yes. And we'll get it done. Even if they had to work 7 days a week, right? Gave up there was no breaks. And I just was watching. I saw it play out. I was like, that my manager is taking on so much that she is going to break down at some point. Like I said, there's a little bit of labor mining. You're more likely to be labor mined if this is you. And then, so the parent who overfeels for their child and then loses their own stability. So you might be so attuned to your children that you forget yourself. It's this form of eraser. You're erasing yourself from the dynamic by just giving in to. I love my mother. God rest her soul. But anytime I wanted anything, she would say, sure, I suppose. There wasn't any like yes or no. Well, there were sometimes yeses, but there was rarely any no's. I would just go and say, hey mom, can I blah, blah, blah. And so there was no boundaries. I was raised with very little boundaries. It was just, what boundaries I had placed on myself, which did a huge disservice to me going into the workforce. Anytime that I was scrutinized. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if this is going to happen. And so I wouldn't even try. And the fact of the matter is, I was a brilliant, capable, bright young lady that could have done anything. But because of these mental limitations I placed on myself, psychological limitations, um, and the lack of having this emotional boundary from my mother, and I didn't have a father. Um, they, my mother's stability and then my stability were like rocky. I didn't know how to navigate those things because I was never shown how to accept no and see the boundary of why that no was. And anytime that I was told no, it wasn't by her, it was by another family member. And I just grew to resent, right? Okay. And I know I'm not the only one that had a life like that, but I'm just sharing that as an example. And then a partner who constantly echoes but never disagrees. So this is the same as, my mother. This could be the same in a partner. Or maybe even another party is always disagreeing, and in order to keep the peace, the other partner just agrees to it, right? This happens very often. This is when the empath turns echoist. Okay, it's a dark form of empathy. Now let's talk about some of the costs of being in this echoist energy. Is the cost is personal. The personal cost first is exhaustion, is burnout, is identity loss. Okay, so if you're experiencing any of that exhaustion, which is likely coming from burnout, you're just going until it gets to empty. I like to drive my cars until it gets to like 10 miles. I'm like, oh my gosh, am I going to make it to a gas station? It just makes life interesting. But if you're doing that to your body, then there is a great personal cost that comes to that. Your body starts to go into, oh my gosh, now we're in failure mode, right? Remember, when you're in a dysregulated, this is all dysregulated nervous systems, right? The personal cost is you might have to, certain things start failing in your body because you've just exhausted yourself so much and depleted your reserves, depleted your energy so much, and now you're unable to show up. The personal cost is it takes time, like, to start getting back to your normal self. The first time I got to extreme burnout exhaustion, where I could barely executive function, I couldn't lift my arm to touch the keyboard. Like, I was looking at it, I was like, you know how to do this? But literally my body would not respond to my executive function. My executive function was like shot. Survival mode only, right? It took me 2.5 years to address whatever was going on. I had no idea. There really isn't a roadmap of how do I resolve this? How do I get out of this? How do I restore myself again? And by the time I restored it, it was very short-lived because then my mom got sick. And I went right back into the exhaustion, right back into the burnout. And then identity loss. Now, the identity loss is an interesting thing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with human design, but in my human design chart, the heart center where the identity rests has no gates whatsoever. And so that really makes it to where it's amplified. Like, I feel other people's energies. So it's almost like I'm a little, I call it identity fluid, where I can hold many identities and it doesn't really cause like an identity crisis. But if you do have that and it's blurred or, impaired, then that can feel a little difficult for you. You might feel a lot of cognitive dissonance because of that identity loss. And cognitive dissonance, like, talk about MK Ultra or aversion therapies, like, that is a really extreme thing to go through, identity loss. We like to have an identity. This is who I am in my family. This is who I am in the workplace. This is who I am in my friend group. This is who I am. This is who I am. Now, if you're breaking that I am, that personal cost can be like extreme mental breaks. All right. Now, the other cost is leadership cost. So if you're in this echoist, dark empathy energy, the leadership cost could be a lack of clarity, no vision. Nobody has no idea who is doing what is going on. It's just a lot of confusion. What was I reading? Oh, Amazon. I did a report on Amazon. So they hired a new CEO. So Jeff Bezos stepped down, and CEO Andy Jassy, I think his name is, stepped up in 2021. And one of his things, so he, entered during this time when the quarantine was happening. There was a lot of remote positions, but he made this extreme call of, we're returning to office. So RTO is returning to office. And that had a lot of cost associated with it, as far as, talented people leaving that company, leaving Amazon. There was also another interesting thing that happened in that, is they went through and they laid off like a bunch of middle managers. Now, managers are important, and I'm bringing this up because I think they, ultimately what they wanted to do wasn't to save on the labor. They wanted like clearer paths of communication. However, if you're wanting clearer paths of communication, having these extreme cuts is a difficult way to communicate that. Yeah, it works in the short term, it works in the interim, but it really is kind of a fear-based tactic to get people motivated to, achieve the vision. So when Google went flat, they did try to flat hierarchy where they got rid of all of these managers. It cost them. Within months, they hired those managers back. They hired back those positions, at least. And when they did that, they said, because they kind of came from this startup, which is kind of what Amazon is doing as well. This startup mind where flat hierarchies work when it's less than 50 people in the company. All right. Once it gets to 50 to 150, that's when like there's more of a need for manager positions. So you can operate pretty well if the group of people is around 50. But once it gets to past that, then you need to establish who is communicating the things to whom. So there was there becomes a lack of clarity. The people that are in the business, they get lost in the sauce. They're like, I don't know if you guys have ever worked, but there's been a lot of times where when I start a position, I have a lot of questions, so I need somebody that is experienced that's able to answer the questions. And eventually I catch on to most of the things, and then I become a source of clarity. Now, if I didn't have that, it would be very frustrating. I don't know who I go to. I don't know who the person is. I don't know what the vision is. Um, and, you know, for Jassy, he does have a vision. Not saying that I necessarily sign off on the way that he's carrying that out, because I don't. But, so it's not really this lack of clarity. But when you start removing managers like that, the middle managers, you can get a lack of clarity in that, and that's the only reason I brought that up. And that comes from Google's flat experiment, where they removed, you know, a good deal of engineering managers and then had to hire them back in 2001, I believe. The leadership cost of this, though, is inconsistency. There's a trust erosion that happens when you don't have anybody standing up and declaring boundaries for the team, you know? And then this also kind of tears into personal relationships, friendships, you know, parent-to-child relationships. The echoist empathy cost, that dark empathy cost, does erode a lot of stuff. So, you know, that lack of leadership is hard, and I think that contributed a lot to my burnout and exhaustion, because then my manager's not having boundaries, and so what does that mean for me working under that manager? Not that most companies are at will, so it's not like I didn't have, but I didn't see that because of the brain fog until it was like at the end. Okay, now let's talk about organizational costs. So the cost of the echoist, the organizational cost is the team runs in circles. And so that is kind of how the Google flat trial, I guess you could say, why that happened and caused such a ruckus. Now, a couple years ago, in 2022, I don't know if you guys remember when Elon took over Twitter before it became X. So Elon takes over Twitter, and I think it was like November 16th, 2022, at like 12 a.m., he sends out a memo or an email to the company and says, you guys have until 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time tomorrow to figure out if you want to be a part of Twitter, and here are the demands of what it is. Now, a lot of people exited. There was a huge exodus. Over 1,200 people left. And the people that were there experienced the organizational cost of not having managers. So they're running in circles doing damage control. And there really wasn't a lot of leadership in that. So you have, that costs about $10 to $15 billion, and maybe even more. The cost of buying Twitter, the cost doesn't even, it's like 80, maybe 80% of what was paid for it. So when nobody is being truly led, when nobody is there to give direction, you have this running in circles. So there's big organizational cost. And then now let's look at the nervous system science behind that, right? So we have the mirror neurons, and then because our mirror neurons are watching everything kind of apocalyptically explode around us. I don't know, you know, maybe apocalyptically is not the right word, but you know, there's damage control that has to happen. And you can imagine in just chaos when somebody dropped, like, Elon basically dropped a bomb on Twitter. He went nuclear. And so the mirror neurons of the people that are, staying in that environment, they're going to be even more hyper attuned to, oh my gosh, what's going on? And it's just for months after. I don't even think it's recovered still. That happened in 2022. It's been almost 3 years. I don't think Twitter really has, now it's X, but I don't think it really has recovered. They lost a lot of the reputation and the trust that eroded from making that, decision in that. So these echoists, this dark empathy of, my way, you have somebody that drops a bomb that's, I don't know, I'm not going to diagnose Elon, but that's not representing some really nice empathetic traits of the people that work under him. It kind of showcases this dysregulated leader and how it impacts everybody. Now, that was in 2022. In 2019, a similar thing happened in Tesla. In Tesla, there was a memo that went out and it was like, we're cutting, X number of employees. We need you to show up and perform better. And now we're just going to cut people. That caused a great amount of dysregulation within the Tesla company. And so you better believe that there was some dysregulated people. So when empathy turns echoist, nobody gets led, not even you. Okay? Now, when we're looking at how do we resolve the echoist empathy? How do we distinguish between empathy and compassion? So empathy is more of a I might go swirly here for a second because I got a phone call. But empathy is more I feel with you. And compassion is I see you and I stay sovereign. I see what you're going through and, I can appreciate what you're going through. However, okay. Am I back? Okay, now I'm back. So compassion is I see you, I see you, I see, that you're feeling confused, and I'm here to support you. Ryan Bradley, welcome, welcome, welcome. I see you, however, I'm going to stay within my own agency. Like the things that you're going through are not mirroring what I'm going through. I have my own feelings that I'm experiencing. So compassion is a little bit more sustainable because now you have the agency to show up and author your life around you without having to mimic those around you. This is where your nervous system gets preserved because you have strong boundaries that are protecting you. So nursing and caregiving of any sort, just being a caregiver for my family members, for my mom and my uncle, I held a lot of empathy because they couldn't speak for themselves. So it was like you almost had to open yourself up to what are they feeling? Can I feel that? But that will burn you out. So I have a lot of respect for nurses, for caregivers who are able to show up and be compassionate and not completely burn out. So nurses who show up in empathy have a higher chance of burning out, a higher chance of becoming exhausted. versus nurses who are compassionate. So they're still within their own framework. They're not letting anybody else's energy bleed into their system because they have boundaries. And so they avoid burnout but still have compassion. Okay? And those are the nurses that we like the most. I've had to deal with so many nurses. And the ones that had compassion, that could hear and see me, but not like lose themselves in that interaction, were the best nurses and or caregivers, right? In fact, I don't know if I've told this story, but when somebody goes into hospice, that's basically like they're preparing them to die, because that person is nearing the end of their life. So you go into comfort care. So here I am, obviously like the biggest nervous system nerd, and you know, I'm like calling the shots for my uncle's medical consent, you know, as needed, and the care team comes in and they're just like, we're here. If there's anything you need, just let us know. We're here to support you. And I like kind of like looked at him like, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean by that? Like, you're gonna give me a hug if I need a hug? Are you gonna listen to me cry? Like, are you gonna bring me a ginger ale or coffee or ice water? Like, what does that mean? Are you gonna give me graham crackers and like a pudding? What do you mean by we're here to support you? Like, be a little bit more specific, because if I mean, if I'm me and I'm looking at, you know, some people they may not be able to show up in the same way that I am, where I'm like questioning how you're delivering care. Be a little bit more specific about it, because like if I'm just in survival mode, if I'm like really concerned about the well-being of my family member, if I'm really concerned about if I'm like really concerned or in like a grief process, then I'm not really going to be in my right mind, my higher mind, where I'm thinking rationally. I'm going to be in my survival mind, and I'm not really going to be able to speak to you in a way that says this is what my needs are. And they were like, oh, that's, you know, that's interesting. Where I've had nurses when I went into a trauma unit that said, we are here to support you with anything that you need. We have ice water, we have some sodas, we have, you know, we have these snacks that we can provide you. We have these things that we can give you to help, you know, manage the trauma that you're experiencing right now. Just let us know and we'll get those things for you. Hi, Tim. Welcome. Thank you for joining. So, you know, that one establishes, here's what I'm able to provide, not this open-ended kind of empty support. This is how I can help provide for you and still show compassion for you in this difficult time. Okay? So those are two situations where, you know, the nurse was very clear about, here's the compassion that I can offer you. And it's not from a place of empathy. It was just from a place of, I'm here to support, and support not just the patient, but the patient's family. Whereas the comfort care team was just kind of saying things to make it sound like they cared. There was no, I mean, there was little compassion. I can tell that maybe they were trying to be compassionate, but there was little compassion. Hollow gestures. Yes, thanks, Ryan. Hollow gestures. And how many of us like that? The small talk of, how are you doing today? Like, and actually meaning that. Like, how are you doing today? Just checking in. Another example that we can talk about is our leaders who practice compassion can hold space without collapsing. Now remember, the echoist is going to collapse. because they're not going to be able to hold anything. They have no boundaries to hold things. Think of boundaries as a container, okay? You're not going to be able to hold things if you don't have those boundaries. Things are going to start leaking. You overpromise. What did we talk about? We said, find my note here. Overgive. Minimize their needs and become invisible, right? We don't want leaders that are like that. We want, and individuals too. You don't want to be around people that are hollow themselves. Like, I often think about this, and this comes up quite often, is, the greatest commandment in the Bible is, one, to love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, and mind, but then also love your neighbor as yourself. Okay? How are you going to love your neighbor if you don't love yourself? That's what I chew on pretty often. So the nervous system first leadership model that that is part of my method to help people to really build these boundaries is first regulating yourself, really connecting and becoming present with yourself, so that when it comes time to say, these are my needs, that you can say it without feeling guilty or shameful about it. And knowing that saying no to somebody isn't like banishing them or excommunicating them from your group or your team. So you start with regulation first. You start by regulating the nervous system first, and then you can connect, and then you can lead. Okay? Nobody wants to be around somebody that they can't connect with, and somebody that's... Would I work for Amazon? No. No. The things that I see with how I work for Tesla or X, no. After seeing how the decisions are made and the vision there, I don't want that energy in my field. Okay, that's a boundary. How's the weather? Yeah, we had thunderstorms yesterday, and Ryan, I know that you're in Oregon. Did you see that we had an earthquake near Coos Bay, Port Orford? People should read The Undiscovered Self by Carl G. Jung. Yeah. I mean, this is part of it, like, right? I think that, a lot of the stories are already in the archetypal stories of the Greek myths and, I guess, Roman myths too. A lot of the old stories that are there, they have a lot of wisdom in them. Okay, so let's look at some practices. So practical application for people that are really wanting to get out of this echoist loop, okay, because it is a loop. Just think about what an echo is. It just keeps on going and going and going until it like fades out, right? And that's basically what this personality trait is you keep going, copying until you fade out into nothing. So one thing to do, it's really easy, is to check the echo before responding. Ask, is this me, or am I mirroring what is in front of me? Now, there's a lot of people that do mirror. In human design, there's reflectors. I happen to be a reflector, so that's why I'm like, don't necessarily diagnose yourself. Just check in with yourself and say, is this me? Is this truly me? I have to do this all the time, just because of the nature of my energy. Or am I mirroring somebody else? I have to constantly do energy clearings on myself, because I will be around people and I take on their energy. It happens naturally. So I'm constantly having to like cut unseen contracts that I have with people, um, and really work on, am I mirroring somebody else, or is this actually me? And it's, I don't really want to get into the mirroring aspects of it, but it's pretty wild. Maybe I'll get into it another day. Now, I don't always want to say like this is the way to activate your nervous system, because it's kind of, it's said like obviously breathe, but let's look at just a micro regulation of, first pause before responding. You don't have to reactively respond to things. You can pause. It's okay to be sitting in silence and thinking about it. And if you need to say that, say, hold on, I need a moment to really think about this. I need a moment to check in with how I feel about the situation. So you pause and you take a deep breath, and then you sense what is happening in your own body before absorbing others. Okay? So it's kind of just to check yourself. Pause. Is this really me, or is this somebody else's? How do I feel about it? Because your body will give you the emotional reaction first. And we can ignore them in favor of others, but we're working on not doing that anymore. Limbic overload, yes. So sense your own body before absorbing others. Now use boundary language. I hear you, and here's where I stand. I hear what you're saying, and here's where I stand with it. This is where my system is going to sit in. Okay? Because I'm the author of my own life. I'm writing it. You're not living my life. You're not handling any of my consequences, good or bad. I accept all of those. But I see, I hear, this is, I can see and hear you. You're heard. Now, the next thing is to do recovery rituals. Now, I told you guys that I'm a reflector, so all of my energy centers are completely open to everyone around me. So I constantly have to reset my body. I constantly have to reset my energy. And you do that through meditation. So I take 2 to 3 Epsom salt baths a week, just 30 to 50 minutes of soaking in an Epsom bath. And I put other things in there, so it's more of a like toxic cleanse. But as I'm in there, I'm meditating. I'll put on some sort of Hertz sound that I can just listen to and just relax. Okay, so the meditation, and then the other recovery is really sitting in silence in order to come back to yourself. Okay, the silence part is waiting without guilt. Waiting without guilt to give an answer. If you need time, a lot of people will honor that because they want to have that same experience with themselves. Is they want you to make the right decision in your body. Most people. Some people are very coercive and manipulative, and so they'll want you to make decisions that benefit them. But we're not mirroring that. We're getting away from that. And I think a lot of people have this echoist tendency to give in just to get along. And it's just like saying it is what it is. Those, kind of ways of thinking, I tend to resist that. So when we look at these ways of breaking these loops, we're really just tuning in to our tuning into ourselves. Is this me? Can I give myself 2 minutes to really consider the full situation of what's going on? While I'm doing that, I'm just going to take a deep breath, pause, think about it. What am I feeling in my body? Presence again. And then once you are able to fully move through that, so every emotion needs roughly 90 seconds. I think 90 seconds might be a little extreme, but every feeling that you get just needs 90 seconds to be recognized. And that emotion is a very interesting, I think sorry, I didn't charge my phone today. So you guys will probably hear me a lot better. I'm sorry if it's really loud now. So once you've processed these feelings, it takes about 90 seconds, like I said. And you can move through them, especially if they're difficult ones. Like if you're feeling anger, frustration. Let me see if I can get my emotions wheel up here. Even staring at an emotions wheel before going into like a meeting or anything like that is positive. I really highly suggest that. Okay. Okay, buddies. Oh, there it is. So here's I like this one because, it starts with these really basic emotions, and then it pans them out to even more descriptive. So I'll sit here and I will just simply stare at the emotions wheel as I'm trying to clear some things out. And maybe I'm feeling fearful. And why am I feeling fearful? I'm feeling anxious. Why am I feeling anxious? Okay, well, let's look. Does overwhelmed sound right, or is worried right? Like which feeling really describes what I'm experiencing right now? And I think looking at the wheel and getting used to some of these descriptive words of certain feelings and being even more precise about the emotion that you're going through is really helpful. In fact, I used to think that I was really disgusted, and maybe I was, experiencing a lot of disappointment. Disappointment is revolted, appalled. Disapproving is judgmental and embarrassed. Maybe I did feel a lot of that. But as I was looking at it and I was looking at the other feelings, I started looking at angry. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I have more of the anger feelings than I do of the disgusted feelings. So truly what's happening is I have a lot of rage that is not being expressed. So, part of I downloaded I did this in December 2024. I looked at that emotions wheel right before I made the decision to leave my previous job. And I was looking at it and I was like, man, this is okay. I'm very much feeling disappointed. And even more so, I'm feeling a lot of anger. And I know that the process that I'm going through right now is not something that I can continue long term. The process that I'm going through right now, I need to really sit and go through some of these feelings. Now, the anger, there's a lot of anger from just going through so much loss. The grief process includes getting angry, right? First, it's denial, and then I think the anger sets in. But if you can't process those angry feelings of, my mom died, and that caused a lot of anger, especially after she died, where I was, even though I had every right to it, I was told that I couldn't have her possessions. And so I'm still very angry about that. How do I process my anger? I'm writing a book. Like, just getting mad and yelling and screaming and being, irrational. Let's look at them. Let down, humiliated, bitter, mad, aggressive, frustrated, distant, critical, dismissive, skeptical, numb, withdrawn, annoyed, infuriated, hostile, provoked, jealous, furious, violated, indignant, ridiculed, disrespected, resentful, and betrayed. Those are all feelings of anger. And I probably feel like 85 to 90% of those. So what I did is, instead of yelling and screaming and like belligerently raging, I am taking all of that anger and I'm putting it through a practical use of just writing a book. Speaking truth and truth telling in a way that processes that anger into something that's, and I don't know, maybe I might have to go shoot guns or like go punch a punching bag or something. But just writing out the nervous system stuff is helpful for me. Okay. So this one is from feelingswheel.com. I really like this one, so I highly recommend this wheel. However, there are charts or wheels out there. These are really good to give to your children too, so that they can communicate how they're feeling, especially if they're in that preteen to teen years of really being clear about, this is how I feel, this is what my needs are. It's very helpful. All right. So, in my method, in my nervous system first leadership method, I do not just weekly teachings. It's not just weekly teachings, but we're doing bi-weekly meditation. So it's just an hour to just calm the system and, do sound healing or like meditation, activated meditation that's voice led, guided meditation. But it also has peer-to-peer support while you're going through the regulation piece. Because remember, we're regulating first, then we're connecting with our teams, and then from that connection, we can lead with ease. It's a lot easier for you to lead when people have a lot of trust in you and your vision, that you're demonstrating competency in where they're going. Okay. Now, empathy is not wrong, and tomorrow I'm going to be doing a full teaching of empathy as a soft skill. Empathy isn't wrong, but when it turns into this echoist energy, that's when it starts to erase you. When you start not having boundaries, when you start not loving yourself, or maybe that's the position that you're sitting in now, and we're working on reversing that. So the beautiful thing about emotional intelligence and social intelligence is it's all a frequency that you can change. Unlike IQ, the intelligence quotient, that number doesn't necessarily change. Like, it kind of stays in a static position unless there's, severe trauma to the brain. That's just how you process pattern recognition, how you, problem solve, how you make decisions. That's all IQ. EQ is a little different, where these things can be improved. There's ways to raise them up, and in some aspects it's a lot more important because it helps us to relate with others. It helps us to connect with others. So the future isn't necessarily just empathy. The future really is having your sovereign agency of decision making.
meaning, I look at sovereignty as what you consent to. Are you consenting to things because it is a definite yes for you? Or are you consenting to things because you think it's going to please others? That it's going to make your life easier if you please others. Okay. Plus the compassion piece. So compassion isn't just giving into others. It's holding yourself together with boundaries. So the sovereignty plus compassion is important. All right. So for everybody that is listening and has made it this far, today notice when you're echoing instead of leading. And that includes yourself. Are you echoing others, or are you leading from your own sovereignty of what you consent to? And then for anybody that is leadership, HR professionals, if you want to test your team's nervous system and where it stands, I am happy to open up a conversation. I am doing calls with people to talk about the nervous system first leadership method, why it's built, and how it can shift your company. And so tomorrow we're going to be talking about a little bit more about empathy as a soft skill. And so yeah, that's my discussion today. I hope you guys got a lot out of it. And see how empathy is still important. However, unbound empathy can lead to destruction. So, lunch over for me. Have a good day. Of course, thanks, Ryan, for joining. Thank you, Mike, for being here, Tim, and everyone else who stopped by. Thank you for liking the podcast today. And I think once I can figure out how to do it, I'm going to be putting these on the podcast sites. Maybe have a Spotify channel so it's all audio only and people can listen to it. But I hope that you guys got a lot out of this today. I may go live later. My son's not feeling very well, so I've been taking care of him, and that's why I've kind of been away from the socials for the last couple days. But he is starting to turn around and mend up a little bit. I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. I did schedule a podcast for tomorrow around 11 my time, Pacific time. And so I hope you join me there. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to pop it in the chat or into the comment section. And I would love to have a conversation about it. But have a good one. Bye, Mike. I'll see you guys later. Cheers.